So when I install router bits, I don't bury them all the way down to the bottom of the chuck. I always like to leave a little bit of shank showing, and that is because with heat and heat cycling, the router bits can get stuck in the collet, and I like a little bit of leeway here in case I need to take a wooden block and tap this to break it loose from the collet. If it's bottomed into the collet, you can't do that. So these work just like this. 2 wrenches, they'll be in the kit. One more quick thing on the inserts themselves. If you look closely, you will notice on this base that coming off of these leading edges, it's ramped. It does it on both of them. Here you can see where it's been pushed down, but it creates a ramp. So what you want to do is you want that ramp corresponds with these little tangs that are what going to hold this collar in place. So you want to make sure that you put this, whichever rub collar you choose, you want to make sure that that ramp is right in front of the tang that's going to hold this thing down in place. And that ramp, because it's a wedge action, is going to suck this collar in nice and tight to the base. Operator's position. So my advice is to install the router from the front face with the switch right here opposite. That's my suggestion. I imagine if you happen to be left-handed, maybe your ergonomics are different, but for me, this works the best. Okay, now we've got the router in the base. The plunge lever is right here. It's spring activated. So if you'll operate that with your right thumb. So when you pull this lever, now the router base will plunge. And if you let go, it locks. So now what we need to do is we need to center the router bit on this rub collar. It is a little bit fussy, but it is worth getting right because it makes all the patterns work there. Now I'm at 745. Come back this way. 755. I'm getting really close. 5. That should be it. Yes. Now I also want to check it in the other plane, so I'll spin around here and I'll see where I am here. So I'm at 740. 755. I'm a little bit broad here, so I'm going to move my base over just a hair there. 745, 747. I'm within 2/1000ths of an inch. I'm going to call that good. 747. Again, within 2/3 thousandths, that's going to fly. Come in here, gently snug the screws. Try not to jog the base at all. Now I come back and snug them up. So now we've centered the router bit on the collet. The only reason I tell you all this is that I'm going to supply this to you completely assembled, but if it gets disassembled for any reason, if this gets nicked, dinged, if it gets banged and things shift on you, or if this base gets damaged, you need to replace it, that's the procedure. You can also just simply put it together, eyeball it, which you can get pretty darn close that way, and just run a test, run a piece, plunge a hole, try one of the plugs in it, see if it all fits. It should be fine. It's a fairly relative measurement. In other words, if the router collet is off to the left, when you're cutting your hole, it's going to cut a little too far to the left on this side, but then it's going to be to the right on this side. It should compensate for itself, but there's no harm in getting it right because then the center line on your pattern is going to be accurate. I don't know how critical that'll be for your situation, but you're going to have plugs coming to you, both plain for where the holes are in the field of it, and there's going to be plugs that are going to have grooves in them, which are to align with the siding lap on the building. And being able to have that pattern centered up on that groove with the center line is going to make the plug groove match the groove in the building between the pieces of siding. All right, next up, I'm going to plunge a sample for you and show you how this all goes together. Okay, setting the pattern. So let's say this is the damaged area, and we're going to use one of the large plugs to cover it. you're going to set the pattern. I've made center line marks in both axes. This axis is probably going to not matter as much because you're just going to eyeball it over top of wherever the damaged area is. I've just simply drawn a single line. You're going to have actually the groove between the two pieces of siding for the most part. But in any event, however you want to go about that is just fine. So you're going to line up the marks I made on the pattern with the center of the groove or the center of the patch, and you're going to orient this just to where you've covered all the area. When you're setting the pattern, bear in mind that the cut is actually a 1/4 inch back from the edge of the pattern, so this isn't the entire opening. It's overall is a 1/2 inch smaller, because that's the difference between the outside edge of the template collar and the cutter itself. So I'm just going to eyeball this thing, centered it up on the damaged area. 1 inch black screws are fine. It's up to you how many screws you use. On the bench in the shop, I probably would only use 2, but if you're up on a ladder and you've got a little more elements to deal with, you might want to put 4 screws in it. Feel free to add more holes, more screw holes if you need them. Just bear in mind you want to countersink them, because these can't interfere with the base of the router as the router is sliding around on the pattern. I'll go ahead and throw 4 in here just for fun. All right, we're ready to cut now. One thing to bear in mind is that if sawdust gets piled up in here, it goes in between the collet and the pattern, it will affect the cut. So depth. I get compressed air or vacuum cleaner, whatever you have available, blow this all out, clean this all out so that you don't get interference between the pattern and the collet itself. So you may have noticed that before I release the router from the work, I also let it fully retract. This is a safety thing, because otherwise I'd have a spinning cutter out here with over 1 inch of it exposed, and believe me, you don't want that to bite you. So I just have gotten into the habit of releasing it before I lift the router away from the work. The depth stop thing, I don't really use all the steps anymore. I usually just set my deepest one, and I just feel it. I just eyeball it. As you've done enough of these, you won't need to bother with all that. You're just going to go in and you're going to touch down and say, okay, there's where my first cut's going to be, and I'm just going to go another 1/4, 3/8, let go of the lever, go, and then you go a little deeper, and I just listen to it. I hear it as it bites. So eventually you'll outgrow this, but for the time being, it's not a bad habit to start with, give you a sense of how the thing works. Before you remove the pattern, look at it, and even take one of your plugs and try it, and make sure that nothing was jammed up in the pattern corners or anything like that. Double check your depth to make sure you have that the depth is correct. The reason I say all this is because once you remove this pattern, it's not going to go back on again exactly in the same place. For carpentry, not a huge issue, especially out exterior, but nonetheless, I've put a lot of work into getting these things accurate, and so it'd be nice to have these plugs really fit well. So just inspect it all, make sure there wasn't anything bunched up anywhere, because if you need to put the router back on it and go again, it's far easier, in the first time having screwed the pattern to the building. So once you're happy that everything is correct, you know, you have all your depth of cut is the way you like it. There aren't any little overlapping marks where where multiple passes didn't align or whatever. You don't need to revisit anything. Now you're ready to pull the pattern off, and you're done on the building. Well, you're done on the routing on the building at this point. So now the pattern comes off. And you're going to need to make some little plugs of some kind just to knock in the screw holes. That's just the cost of doing business. Sometimes with router patterns, if it's not as heavy of a cut as this, I'll use double stick tape and stick this on. In an exterior situation with rough sawn material, that's probably not going to work. It's not going to work well. It's not going to work for long. And so I'm afraid you're probably just going to have to deal with some little plugs. You can either make them, or I use bamboo skewers all the time if it's paint grade, but for cedar I think you're probably going to need to make some little sticks that you can knock plugs in there. These are pretty discreet, so you might be able to get away with even just a little bit of exterior filler. However you want to roll with that, I'm going to leave that call up to you. Okay, so there's our plug hole that's cut and ready to go. I'm going to bang out a couple of plugs, and then we'll try fitting them. And this is where it's crucial that you double check the depth of the hole. I will do my best to get all the plugs exactly the same thickness, but you're gonna want to dial that in kind of final, because once this plug goes in, those babies are in there. They're hard to get out. So you're gonna want to just double check that the depth of the recess matches the plug you're using in that hole. Okay, so here's one of the plugs that you're going to be getting a whole box of. I haven't grooved this one yet to match the tongue and groove of the siding there. But double check your depths of everything. You know, double check the depth of the recess against the thickness of the plug. You will be doing all of that in your setup phase on the router anyway, because as I said before, once you take the pattern off, it's really tricky to get it back on in exactly the right place. So in any event, just double check that all your thicknesses are correct. If your recess for any reason is too deep, you can put a little bit of shimming behind it, just whatever it takes to get you there. But you know, you get the idea. You just want to match it up before you put it in, because once this thing goes in, it's in. All right, so then you're going to set it in place. And in it goes. Rubber-headed mallet. You know, of course, you know all the tricks. You can use a flat piece of scrap to bang it down, whatever works for you. These things are darn tight. It's up to you if you want to put a little bit of construction adhesive behind it. That's fine. If you wanted to tack a couple of toes in there, whatever works for you. When the groove is in there, that's a shadow line. You're never going to see anything anyway. You could even fire a couple of nails in there, and I'd skew them just so that this thing isn't all on the pull-out strength of the nails. So there you go. There's a plug.